day, and welcome to The Signal on CBC Radio across Newfoundland and Labrador and on your CBC Listen app. I'm Heather Barrett in St. John's, and today is Tuesday, November 5th, and we're talking about clutter. You know you have it. A kitchen drawer full of empty yogurt containers, clothing that hasn't seen a hanger in years, a shed you have to tunnel through to get to your snow tires. Am I talking about me? Maybe. We are going to attempt to help you in our next hour. My guest today is April Miller. April's a trained professional organizer with Professional Organizers of Canada. She's based in St. John's. April is ready to take your calls, your questions, your suggestions for decluttering your spaces and the spaces of your loved ones. The numbers to call are 709-722-7111 and 1-800-563-8255. You can also send us a text, 709-327-8206, or an email, thesignal@cbc.ca. Hello, April.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now, I got to ask you, you are a trained professional organizer. How did you get into being a professional organizer?
I was sort of really interested in spaces and the design of spaces and just sort of decorations and interiors in general. But then when I looked at what I really like doing in a space is sort of making it function better. So going into a place where, even my own spaces where there were issues with flow or things building up on certain surfaces and looking at how to improve that and make it work better for myself. And so then found training in that area and decided to bring it to clients. And always a big fan of clean sweep for people with Peter Walsh back in the day on TLC. So sort of went from that inspiration and started on my own.
So how do you train for this? Do you go to decluttering school or something?
Yeah, so I actually did classes and with professional organizers in Canada, they do it's like the high school of organizing, and it's classes in organizing a pantry or a kitchen. But then I did more intensive training with an institute in the States, and they look at sort of what drives the cluttering behavior. So whether that's aging or hoarding or ADHD, anxiety. And so then you can look at how to work with clients around those things as opposed to just sort of a cookie cutter approach to organizing a pantry.
All right. Now, what makes this a good time of year to think about decluttering?
I think it's always a good time of year to talk about decluttering. But I think this time of year in particular, when people are sort of, moving inside a little more and their spaces should be comfortable and cozy, especially now we're getting colder weather. And, to want to kind of hunker down in your space and be comfortable instead of sort of looking around and feeling anxious about the amount of stuff, or even sort of looking around and seeing unfinished tasks in your stuff, for a lot of people creates kind of a feeling of being unsettled. So there's a great time before you get comfortable in your home and hibernate a little bit.
Well, I know when my children were small, and I'd be speaking with my friends who also had small children, the feeling was you had to declutter now to make space for the clutter of the Christmas and holiday season coming up.
Right. That's a little bit of a funny one to me that I really didn't think about until I had my own child, that there is that kind of trend of people gutting out, I guess I'll say, before Christmas so that they can make room for new stuff. I'm not a huge fan of that approach. I'd like to kind of keep things at a level that, you can bring in new toys or whatever and not be overrun. But now kids definitely have probably more stuff than they've ever had, certainly compared to when I grew up. So for me, we always sort of set a limit of we get 4 or 5 gifts for our daughter at Christmas, and that's not going to take over your house, hopefully.
Well, the numbers to call if you have a question about decluttering or if you've got a tip about how you keep a certain space tidy, we want to know about it. Call us 722-7111. 1-800-563-8255. You can text 709-327-8206 or send us an email, thesignal@cbc.ca. Now, I keep referring to the kitchen cupboard that you open and all the empty plastic containers and yogurt containers tumble out onto the floor.
Avalanche, yep.
That's me.
Right.
What can I do about that?
I think the first thing I would say for that type of cupboard, and everyone has that sort of avalanche cupboard, and it does tend to be the Tupperware storage container cupboard. So you can invest in specialized inserts to contain that sort of thing, but they tend to be pretty specific to the storage products that you have, and they're really expensive. So I kind of like to shop from clients' homes and not then bring in more products just to solve an issue. So I think you can do that approach, but the first thing I would do is just take everything out of the cupboard and look for things that don't match up. So everyone has the container without a lid or the lid without a container. Looking at anything that's kind of been, the plastic containers that have been maybe heated and then things are sort of looking a little
orangey.
Orangey, or sometimes they even look a little bit like they're peeling a bit. Those ones definitely, I think, from a food safety perspective, you would want to look at moving on. And lots of people will repurpose those containers and use them as storage for screws or old Christmas lights or whatever. But if you don't have a need for that, I think move it out of your house and then look at just what are the containers I actually use. So sometimes people are not asking themselves, what do I actually use in this space, as opposed to, does it all match up and have a lid? If you have certain containers that you just never go to, then those can probably move to a new home.
Now, I also know I have a little bit of this tendency, and I know other people, maybe listeners who have this too. If you have that container without a lid, you don't want to let it go. You don't want to throw another piece of plastic into the landfill, or you feel bad just throwing something away.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely a huge issue, I would say. I would think 99% of my clients that they don't want to contribute to waste. So obviously looking at where can you recycle things, where can you find a new use for it or repurpose it. But I do also have a subset of clients then who get really caught up in keeping things for that purpose. And then that becomes its own category of clutter, these sort of unfinished projects or the things that could become something but never do. So, if you can recycle it, if you can pass it on, there's free groups on Facebook, for example, and people will really snag almost anything. If you post it and just say it's free, pick it up, it's on my front step, or, meet at a safe location. There's always someone who wants these things. So I've even had people pick up like old plumbing, and for whatever reason, they want that from a client. So they'll come and take it away.
Huh. Mm-hmm. Okay. The numbers to call, 722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. An email, thesignal@cbc.ca. You can text 709-327-8206. My guest in the studio is April Miller, a professional organizer. She has loads of organizing and decluttering tips. We want to hear your tips. Like, how do you deal with some of the places in your home or property or space that just get piled up with stuff? Please tell us, how do you handle it? Now, April, just tell me about some of the clients that you work with. Like, who are the types of people that you're in to do some work for?
So I would say, by and large, I have two main groups. It would be people who are sort of around retirement age. If they're not retired, they're looking ahead to that, or, they're looking ahead to maybe downsizing into a condo or even just a smaller home. And so they're at that sort of transitional phase in life where, sometimes they are sort of taking on that approach of looking ahead and not wanting to burden their kids with eventually having to declutter their stuff, or they just want to take control of it themselves. So because they're in that sort of transitional headspace anyway, that often lends itself to looking at your stuff and your surroundings. And they are really awesome clients to work with because they are really motivated and they often have goals that they're working towards that are pretty specific. My other big, group would be clients who have young kids. And so they tend to be people who have toddlers, babies and toddlers. Not so much probably starting at around, 1 year old, just because when you're in the newborn phase, you're probably not in the decluttering headspace. But people get really overrun with stuff with young kids, whether that's from grandparents or, people who want to clean out their own homes and they're saying, oh, I have all these old clothes, you can have it all. And then it becomes a bit of a burden. And those are often families, too, that are in homes where maybe the house has an undeveloped basement. As the kids are aging, they're thinking, you know what, let's make a playroom in the basement or a rec room, and they can have their friends over eventually. And they want to gut that space out. So they're getting rid of all the old big plastic toys and, the brightly colored objects that have taken up a lot of space and clearing out for that.
Okay, because I know when we developed our basement, I really remember the biggest part of that job was getting everything out that we'd thrown in there.
Yeah, people tend to use
Yeah.
it as a storage space. So then it's like, where do you store that stuff if, you're not going to gut it out? So for a lot of people, they want to kind of move it along somewhere that hopefully it'll see new life and get a kind of more use out of it. So that helps a lot of people.
Okay. Now, I know something that a lot of people in my life are going through is what we're calling clearing out a house. You've got an older parent who is downsizing into a smaller space, or you've got parents who have passed away. You got to gut out the house to sell it.
Yeah.
What do you do with a house with a lifetime full of stuff?
So I will say, I think my record is I did work with a client once where they were moving into assisted living. And so in that case, the family, they were in a big rush. They were on a very tight timeline, and we cleared the entire house in 3 days.
What?
Yeah. I mean, down to like forks and knives. The house was empty in 3 days because it wasn't a case where they could bring a lot into the space. The constraints of the space dictated what they could bring. And so a lot of it was either getting donated or sold. And so just through posting it strategically, we were able to donate a lot of things and move it along. Especially to certain community groups. There's groups out there for everything. And at the time, we had a lot of new Canadians coming in who really could use those things. So a lot of it went there. However, for most people, they're not on that tight of a timeline. And so I would say really looking at if someone is moving into assisted living, the first thing would be looking at the constraints of the space and what means the most to them. And I think a lot about those people having to they're really changing their lifestyle quite a bit. So what's going to make them feel the most comfortable in that new space? And for some people, it might be the rocking chair they've had for, 50, 60 years or, the old Afghan that was tossed over the couch. But really sort of thinking consciously about making that a comfortable transition and letting that lead what is going to go with them. And then really looking at the goals, like, is it a situation where you do want to make some money back on selling things? Some people will do estate sales and things like that. If not, it often is very helpful to people to know that their stuff is going to somewhere that, it's going to see new life. It's going to be used again and maybe cherished by somebody else. So I think that makes it a lot easier for people to let go. And looking at the least sentimental items first. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people kind of dig in and kind of want to take charge of the situation. It often ends up being adult daughters who take this on. And it's sort of like, come on, Mom, you got to get rid of the wedding dress or, these old letters or whatever. But those are the things that probably mean the most to the person. So I would definitely start with the least sentimental, like Tupperware or whatever it is, and then go from there.
Where can you send old Tupperware other than a landfill?
So you can post. I mean, honestly, Facebook is often my go-to for getting rid of things. There's groups Free and Recycle and Need Something, Got Something. There's a group for new Canadians to St. John's and metro area. So those tend to be my go-to just because someone who really wants it or needs it is going to take it on. But even places like sometimes animal rescue groups will take that kind of thing if they're trying to feed a lot of animals and, they need pet bowls, for example. So really, even if you just post on Facebook Marketplace for free and specify pickup only, if you really don't want to even get into dropping something off, that is really a fast and easy way to do it.
Okay. The numbers to call, 722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. You can text 709-327-8206 and send us an email, thesignal@cbc.ca. The shed.
Right.
Can you tell me about some types of sheds you have encountered in your life?
Yeah, the shed tends to be my most resistant clients. So
do tell.
Most of my clients are female, I will say that. And sometimes it's females who are trying to bring the male in their life along on their decluttering path. And they tend to be really frustrated by the shed or the garage because they also maybe need to access things in there or, they want to be able to find a tool when they do need it and, it's not necessarily easily accessible. So for a lot of people, what I see is that they're pretty set in that mindset of if I can find it, I have a system.
Yeah.
But really the system in a garage or shed should be anyone should be able to walk into that space. And I would argue any space could be like that anybody could figure out your system. So, if somebody came in and whatever, like a general person who's just going to do a simple task in your house, they need a screwdriver. They should be able to literally lay their hands on that pretty easily. A lot of things end up in the shed and the garage that are sort of, that'll be good for something someday. So it's, the bajillion screws that maybe really are not going to be used ever, and scrap wood. And I would say for a lot of clients of mine in particular, projects end up there, furniture that they're going to refinish. And so a lot of my work with clients sometimes is around conversations of letting go of projects. So it's not just the stuff, but it's, are you really going to take on refinishing that old piece? And if you do, what are you then going to do with that piece? So sometimes the project is really fun, but then you still have the stuff left from it. Old paint. So in the shed or garage, I really like to start with things that are obvious waste. Mm-hmm. And they're really not going to be good to anyone.
Yeah.
So things like old paint that can be recycled at Robin Hood Bay. And that gives you a little gentle inroad into then organizing the rest of the space. And to be honest, typically in those spaces, my approach is not let's get in here and throw a bunch of things out or get rid of things, just because those clients don't tend to be as receptive to that. Yeah, thank you. So usually it's looking at how can we create a system that's going to work for everybody and not just you, and still kind of creating a sense of control and empowerment for the person who feels like that is their zone. And I have had clients who have lost a spouse, for example, and then they do take on the garage or the shed, and it's incredibly overwhelming because they don't know what every little screw is for or every tool is for. So a big thing in the garage and shed is often labeling as well, just so other people know why this piece matters that they don't recognize.
Oh, my goodness. And again, rather than put things into a landfill, like things that come out of sheds, I know Robin Hood Bay is excellent for paint.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised sometimes at the things I didn't know you could recycle. Like what out of your shed can actually not be trash?
Yeah, like even metals and batteries of various forms. And oftentimes people are doing different projects out there, and you might post something that you kind of think is trash and someone out there wants it for whatever reason. So I do see people often posting about garage clear outs. And so you get things that way.
Oh, my. The numbers to call are 709-722-7111 and 1-800-563-8255. You can also text 709-327-8206 or send us an email, thesignal@cbc.ca. Now, we don't want to know about your messy whatever. Like, this is a judgment-free zone. We are not saying that you have a lot of clutter, so we're not judging you. But you are here to ask questions about storage. And if you found some kind of storage solution or a way to kind of pass on some things that you no longer need to use, and you want to tell our listeners about that, tell us so we can spread the news.
Yeah, I think the judgment-free zone statement definitely applies even for me in working with clients, because almost everyone I've ever worked with, when I first go for a consult, they'll say, I bet this is the worst space you've ever seen. Everyone has that sense of shame. And some spaces, I'm thinking, why am I even here? This looks immaculate. And they're saying, I bet this is the worst you've ever seen. So it's really never the worst. And for me, if it's the worst, it's a thrill, because I'm like, okay, we've got a real opportunity to do really great work.
And maybe it's just a function of our society. Like, it's so easy to accumulate things. Like, I think it's like almost even harder to be a minimalist.
Yeah, it's definitely, I can remember when we were seeing a lot of new Canadians coming from Syria, and I was funneling a lot of things from my clients through to that community that was developing here. And I remember one family in particular made the comment to me, there's so much stuff. There's just so much stuff that people have to give away. And it really stuck with me, because we have so much more than we need. And it's easy to get stuff. We definitely have a pretty consumerist culture. Mm-hmm. And, things are cheaper and easier to get than they ever were before. So people tend to build things up, and they don't have a lot of time to clear it out and maintain it maybe like they would have once upon a time.
And is being a minimalist the key here?
I really like the phrase being an enoughist. It's not a real word. It's just a word that I use. But I can remember a couple years ago in a different Facebook group, they were talking about clutter and organizing, and somebody made the comment about me and my work and said, well, April Miller's a minimalist, though, so you can't go by what she says. And I was really surprised by that because I thought, I'm definitely not a minimalist. That took on a real kind of competitive streak for a while. Like there was the Minimalist Show, then there's, Marie Kondo, and this whole movement of get to 100 things or less, and then there was 50 things or less. And that's when tiny homes were kind of really becoming a trend. And I really don't think it's about being a minimalist. It's about looking at what works for you and your lifestyle and your family and having the things that make you comfortable without becoming a burden. Mm-hmm. So once, you're opening that cabinet and it's annoying you because it's an avalanche on your head every time, then that obviously impacts your quality of life. If you're kind of having to do kind of the sideways, stepping through your basement, through goat paths, to find one thing, that's impacting your quality of life. So to me, it is really about what works for you and your family. I've had clients who definitely are aspiring minimalists. Most people just really want their homes to be comfortable and to function better. Mm-hmm. And we have seen it kind of swing back the other way, where now there is a movement around being a maximalist.
Oh, my.
And it was this whole celebration of, I want a ton of stuff, and I really like having a very sometimes sort of opulent feeling environment, but filled with things that represent my life. And, I definitely have those clients as well, that every item in their home tells a story, and there's something to be said for that too. More
is more.
Yeah, for some people it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us how you handle your living space. 709-722-7111. 1-800-563-8255. And this is a judgment-free zone. There's no amount of stuff or a way to tidy your space that is the right way. As April's saying, it's the right way for you.
Yeah, and some of my best tips have come from clients. Like, clients are oftentimes really good sources of inspiration and information. So sometimes they've said things that I would have never thought of, and it's just an approach they use that then I often adopt for other people.
Well, I mean, what if you're, I know people who are real collectors, right? Like, they're always scouring Facebook Marketplace.
Right.
And they are the people that will go, I don't know what I'm going to use that for, but I know I'm going to use it someday. Mm-hmm. Like, if that is your way, right, which many people are, how do you organize that in your life to make sure that it's not going to backfire on you?
Right.
Yeah.
So collectors are different from other groups in that, a collector typically takes a lot of pride and they really celebrate their collection. It's kind of like part of their identity.
Yeah.
So, for example, I collect old scrub boards, old washboards, like antique or vintage scrub boards. And for me, that's a display on my wall in my house, and it is a positive memory. And so I think for a lot of people, if you're going to be a collector, looking at, is it that you're just driven to get every single item of a certain variety, or is it that you take pleasure and pride in the collection itself and in the process? Some people love going out thrifting and, hunting down garage sales, and that's its own hobby. Mm-hmm. And they're meeting people and socializing. So I think if you look at those wider benefits, there's nothing wrong with that. So if you're collecting, looking at, do you have the space for it? And I often do sort of a one out, one in approach in my own home. So if something is coming in, something else has to leave. And so for a collector, if they're going to make room for whatever the collection is, how do they then let go of other things to make sure that it doesn't sort of cramp their style?
Oh, my goodness. I mean, I keep thinking of, like those shows, Canadian Pickers and stuff, when they're, going to see someone who they know they can find something cool for, and they've got these cavernous storage areas.
Yeah, and I'm sort of infamous, I guess, in my home for I shop with photos. So if I go places, I'll take pictures of everything that I'm kind of intrigued by and then never actually follow through on getting the items. And sometimes that's led to real regret. So if it's, something that you really feel attracted to and that you think would lend you some pleasure in your life, there's nothing wrong with that. This is not a judgment on having how much stuff you have and on having things. It's just looking at, is it comfortable in your space and does it work for you in your stage of life as well?
Actually, when you talk about photos, that reminds me of a tip that somebody gave me this summer when I was involved in a big decluttering, cleaning situation. And he said, take a photo of the thing that you can't let go of and then donate it.
Right.
So then you have a photo of your loved object.
Yeah, I sort of feel torn about that approach, to be honest. I actually used to recommend the exact same thing and then found that for some people, the tangible item really, it brings up certain feelings when they hold the item, when they look at the item. Obviously, if you're in an extreme downsizing situation, then the photo thing, and maybe then making a photo book of those precious items would be great, because then you have it out and you can look at it. But for a lot of people, especially in the digital age, photos become their own source of clutter, and they don't necessarily then look back through to remember on that item fondly. So I sort of have switched my approach on that, and I've thought, if you have the space for the item, fine, keep the item, because there are a lot of people who really, the physical thing, when they pick it up, that's what brings back the memories.
Right.
But if you're going to do the photo thing, I think to, make it into a photo book or frame the photo or whatever, but have it be something that it's not just buried in our photo archives of, 2 million digital photos.
Yes, because digital clutter is another thing.
Yeah, that's its whole own world. It's really hard for people, like photos, emails, files on their computer that they just never get to. And to some extent, I would say for a lot of that, to be honest, if you have the storage space, it doesn't overly matter. That's not an area that I have found people get a lot of satisfaction from decluttering, but it's more so the physical, tangible space that they really, it gives them a real boost to take some ownership over that.
Okay. Got to ask you about Marie Kondo and the KonMari method.
Right.
That was huge a few years ago.
Yeah, I did presentations on it at the time. Yeah, a lot of talk about that method. I think for some people, when they looked at her method, they really critiqued it. And a lot of what they were critiquing was sort of a cultural difference. So, when she's saying that things are infused with sort of a spirit of sorts, and that you thank the item before you let it go. And some people found that to be really foolish. But, that is really rooted in her culture. So I don't know that was necessarily, I guess, a criticism that was all that applicable. But I've had a lot of clients who, if they are someone who's very attached to items, saying goodbye to it, like really full on mourning the item and saying goodbye, it does let them let go. And they are able to sort of move past it in a way. So I love the KonMari folding method. I definitely took that on in my own house. My whole family uses it.
I use it too. And I think we were just talking before we got on the air. I think it's probably created a third more space in my drawers.
Yeah, and that is, I actually think that's the number that she says, that it would give you about a third more space. I found it really great when we had our daughter, and then it was so good for storing baby clothes, because you tend to have, a ton of, for example, newborn pajamas, but just because they go through them so much, but it created all that extra space. But I really like it because so many of my clients are visual people. And so if they can't see something like a clothing item, they never wear it. And if you have your items where your shirts are, sort of that vertical file storage approach, you can see it, and then you are more likely to circulate your clothes.
Yeah, so it's like almost like they're stacked up, and it's like a filing cabinet when you pull open a drawer.
Standing up vertically as opposed to, kind of having your items in layers like a sandwich. And it really makes a big difference. And I do like as well she does say sort of to fold everything in thirds. I don't necessarily use her approach for every item, but definitely for shirts and pants, I use it. And then for my daughter's 5 now, and I still use it for most of her things. But for a lot of people, I think if you can take her method and adapt it into making things visual. So I have a lot of clients who really prefer hanging storage. And so if they really want to hang almost everything. And so in that case, making sure that if you are hanging everything that you can see it, it's not super bunched up, having things organized by color and then by sleeve length. Makes it really handy in Newfoundland, when you one day could be super warm and the next day really cold. So looking at kind of adapting some of those and how can you make it work for you. But I think for her, a lot of it was just looking at, does it serve you in your life? Does it spark joy? Was sort of the big thing.
Yes.
And the other big criticism was, my broom doesn't spark joy. My, cleaning products don't spark joy. Do I just throw those all out? But in her book, she really gets into it's the outcome that sparks joy. Most people enjoy a clean home, even if they don't really want to do it.
Yeah.
So, I don't necessarily love my vacuum, but I love what it does. Mm-hmm. And so looking at it from that perspective, I think is helpful for people as well.
Yeah, and I think she's actually backed off on some of her more strict measurements now that she has small children.
I think so. I think the other thing is probably a little bit of a cynical mindset, but she has gotten into a little bit of product sales as well. So, there is a little bit of, she can't really tell people to get rid of everything if she's then trying to sell them things. But having kids, when she had her second or third book come out, it was a little bit of a different approach. And even on her TV show, she did show a bit of a different approach rather than this sort of extreme minimalist environment. And I guess as well, when you look at Japan and people's square footage of their homes, they have to be much more efficient in their space. Whereas here, we tend to have bigger homes with more storage space. And we don't necessarily need to be as stringent as Marie Kondo would have been.
Mm-hmm. 722-7111, 1-800-563-8255, 709-327-8206 is our text number. You can also drop us an email, thesignal@cbc.ca, and let us know how you have solved a clutter situation in your life. How have you impressed your significant other with how you've tidied up your shed? Have you got all those little jars nailed up to a beam with the lids and you're screwing them on and putting the different size nails in it? Are you one of those people? Just tell us how you have blown someone's mind with cleaning out a clothes closet.
Yeah, and now people with the crickets and that whole movement of sort of like really next level labeling.
Oh.
People really get into, even in their sheds and garages, doing a beautiful job of organizing things. And my dad has a garage where, every toolbox is sort of, one is for plumbing, one is for electrician type work. And he got me to do labels for all of his different toolboxes. And it helps it function better, but it also really looks great when you go into the space. And I really think that even a space that is pure function like a laundry room, it's still nice if it feels aesthetically pleasing. So it's, why not make those functional spaces more pleasant to be in general? Okay,
well, tell me about this labeler and this labeling system. How has that helped you in your work?
Yeah, so I think in general, it's something that I find if other people are also using the space, because I also can claim that mindset that people have sometimes of, I know where everything is, so there's no problem. But I have had a bunch of clients actually who have gone through fairly significant illnesses or, have been in recovery from surgeries and we have actually done organizing projects in anticipation of their recovery. Mm-hmm. And so other people are coming into their space and need to be able to find things easily. And so they will get into that labeling system where it could be the spice drawer, it could be the garage, it could be even doors in their homes, like what is behind kind of door number 2 sort of thing. And it helps their caretakers or the people who are going to kind of pitch in. And even babysitters, if you have a young family, for them to really know where everything is. And I did that when my daughter was small. Every drawer I had labeled kind of on the top of the drawer so that the minute someone opened it a crack, it said on the lip of the drawer what was in there. So then they didn't need to fully open every drawer and go through it. So it does help people in that way. And then your space is not just functional for you, it's functional for everyone.
Okay, great. And people don't feel like they're invading someone's privacy too.
Yeah. Having those private things too tucked away. I think, so I will say I've organized almost everything under the sun and every type of drawer out there. And people always have that one drawer they don't want you to go in or that one closet. But, everyone sort of has the same stuff in their homes by and large, and there's really nothing to be embarrassed about. But I think as well, if someone is coming into your house, you do want to have a space where that stuff is tucked away and people aren't going to see, whether it's like your old journals or whatever it might be. So having a space, even whether it's like, I don't know, a lockbox or if it's a drawer that is just labeled personal. So then hopefully that doesn't entice people to go in and investigate and it actually deters them. But sometimes that can be helpful too, especially if you have family coming to visit and, you want to create some boundaries.
Okay. Now, I know a big backlog spot for a lot of people is, I guess, what we call a front or back porch.
Yeah.
You got maybe like a regular size closet. Mm-hmm. You got a small space that might be shut off by a door to the main part of the house. Mm-hmm. But it's like everybody and everything goes through there and gets dumped there.
Yeah. It is really challenging. I would say porch areas in particular tend to be sort of the really poorly designed spaces in houses that I would say, and not the homeowner or my clients, but just the space itself is often too small for families. So especially in Newfoundland, where you could need different footwear, 4 different pairs in 1 week. So a lot of the times what I would say to people is if things can get vertical, so use your wall space wherever possible. I have IKEA cabinets on my walls that they're plastic, which, I know people might not be on board with the plastic piece, but they store a ton of stuff. So we have one for mitts, one for hats, and they're super low profile, like 9 inches off the wall, I think.
Okay.
To the point, I should be a spokesperson for the product at this point, but looking at, can you use your wall space? Can you get vertical and not have everything on the floor? And then for my family in particular, we have a kid's side of the porch and a grown-up side of the porch. And on the kid's side, there's kid height coat rack so that the kid can hang up their own stuff. There's a kid's shoe area so they can put away their own things. It unfortunately happens a lot that in most homes, one person becomes the keeper of all the stuff and the organizer and the nag as well, which is no fun. So if you can empower the other people in your family to put things away more effectively, that's often really helpful for that situation. So, I have a 5-year-old and she can definitely hang up her own coats and put away her shoes and her hats. Everything is at her height. And that's obviously gets adjusted as she gets older. But if you look at daycares, daycares often have a cubby. Kids put all their stuff away. They learn how to do all that. And so you can adopt that for your kids as well. A lot of families will adopt sort of that locker sort of system, even just with hooks. Like put a bunch of hooks on your wall. They're really cheap. You can get them even at thrift stores. So not always having to go to, the custom designed mudroom, but looking at how can you get a bunch of storage in a small space. And even for myself, I lived in an older home most of my adult life. We really didn't have storage space in a porch. So a lot of shoes and coats lived in an alternate spot, and we just sort of brought out what we needed as we needed it. And that really forces you to maintain your things so you don't have 50 coats, So
I was going to ask you about that because winter's coming up, which means winter coats, boots, hats, everything. Like, how do you manage that sort of space with the change of season?
Yeah, for me, summer is a little easier because obviously you're not, I use baskets a lot in my porch in particular, and I mount them on the wall. I try not to have things on the floor. So there's a hat basket, a mitt basket. In the summer, it becomes a sunscreen and bug spray basket.
Yeah.
So looking at a seasonal change out like that can be really helpful. And then really minimizing how many toques do you really need. I'm a sucker for a good coat, I will say. It's probably my biggest weakness. But looking at how many coats can I actually wear and are applicable to Newfoundland weather.
Yeah.
So minimizing where possible and then looking at the vertical storage, doing the seasonal switch out, and then getting real creative. I would say going on Instagram and Pinterest, even probably TikTok for some people. There's people out there who have really creative storage ideas. So looking at how do you make use of a really tiny space really effectively.
Okay. And then there's the maintenance. Like, it's one thing for you to come in. I see this, your eyes are widening here. It's one thing for you to come in, do a complete sort of gutting out of someone's house, set up their closets and their systems. But how do people maintain what you have left them with?
Yeah, I think I can remember years ago I said to my husband at the time, I was like, if we actually just maintained things, we would never have to do these big projects. And it was like, oh my goodness, what an epiphany. But most of my clients would be in the same boat. So I would say I get some people where you set them up with a system, you minimize, and they are just off and running. And literally you never hear from them again. They pick up some kind of tips and tricks and they're good. Most of my clients, though, are in the boat where you might do a big project or even a big project of a room. And then I'm going in kind of periodically for maintenance checks when they're like, okay, April, I'm getting really overwhelmed again. Can you come in and help me? And we're just going over the same tips and tools, but maybe they've had a life change or sometimes they've had an injury, so they need things to be accessible in a different way. And so looking at adjusting to their current circumstances. But I think things like for me, the 1 in, 1 out rule is really helpful. Mm-hmm. I've had clients who we've had to do the 1 in, 5 out rule just because of, their goals and the amount of stuff that they had. And looking at when you're shopping is probably the bigger thing. So not letting yourself buy something unless you can really think quickly of a plan of where is it going to be stored? Can I access it easily? Am I really going to use it? You can really think something is great and beautiful and even functional without having to own it. So for a lot of people, just getting really realistic about their lifestyle. And if you're someone who lives in yoga pants and you see a beautiful, dress or whatever at a local store, if that's not in your lifestyle, having a lot of focus around your goals and not buying it so that then it becomes clutter.
Yeah.
That's cutting it off at the pass is the real trick. So for a lot of people, a lot of my clients, it's cutting it off, the influx from friends and family members.
Oh, yeah. Now, I wanted to talk to you about clothes, too. Like, how much is clothing a clutter issue?
For most people, I would say clothes and paper are the two big ones.
Oh, okay.
Most people wear about 20% of their closet.
Right.
I will say people who use the more visual storage systems like the Marie Kondo or, a lot of hanging storage tend to wear their clothes more. I always used a system for myself where every time I wore an item, when I hung it back up, I would turn the hanger backwards on the rack. So then I could easily look and see, I've worn those 20 things, but I haven't worn those. So at the end of a season, if I still haven't worn it, it's probably going to go. If it was something I really loved, but I still hadn't worn it, I have a sentimental clothing basket. And if it's something that I love it and I'm sentimental about it, I'll put it in that basket. It's not in active rotation.
Right.
So even looking at creating a category like that sometimes is really helpful for people. But, I'm not a person who buys a lot of trends. I think for people who do that, they tend to end up having more clothes. And there's nothing wrong with that if they wear the things and they enjoy it. But then you're looking at storing more items. So
the sentimental clothing basket. Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, and the hangers backwards is really helpful for people, the one in, one out kind of rule. But I also have a bag typically in my porch, but I used to have one right in my closet that was a donation bag. And if I tried something on, and I was like, I'm not in the mood to wear this. And, if you're doing that repeatedly with certain items, something about that item is not working for you. So I would pop it right in the donation bag right from my closet. And the minute it's full, I pop it in my car, maybe drive around with it for a bit just because, people tend to struggle to find time to drop things off. But eventually it will get dropped off somewhere. But really looking at the color, does it work for you? The condition of it, if it's covered in nibs and you're never going to be the person who does the denibbing or shaving of it. And if it's the right size. I think size is probably the biggest struggle for people. So I have a lot of clients who have things that they don't fit into anymore that they really want to fit into again, or their clothes that is bigger just in case they gain some weight and, they want to have those things around just in case.
Right. Because what I was thinking about in terms of clothing too and clothing donations, my understanding is that sometimes you donate to a thrift store or a charity organization. Not necessarily everything that you donate is going to wind up on a rack and in someone else's possession.
Yeah, a lot of things actually end up in overseas markets, and in some countries it's kind of decimated, their textiles markets, because they have such an influx of foreign donations. So I can remember years ago, a friend of ours bought, I think it was a T-shirt from his high school basketball team or something of that nature, something highly specific, and he was living in Africa. And so, those things do often get shipped overseas. And then I definitely have clients who are very environmentally conscious and they're thinking about the shipping and the pollution. And so where possible, I like to donate directly to a human and pass along, but also local places. Choices for Youth posts all the time about things that they want. The Stella Circle, they also will post very specific items, same as The Gathering Place. So following all those places on social media, they will always be posting, this week we're looking for men's boots, this week we're looking for mitts or whatever it is. And then you can donate knowing it's going to go directly to a person.
Yeah.
It's more so the chain thrift stores, I would say, that it's probably hit or miss if it's going to go on a rack versus getting shipped or even stripped down for rags or repurposed that way.
Okay. Now, you've got this incredible master list of places that you can donate items to rather than just bring them to a landfill. Can you give us a sense of some of just like the real basic go-tos?
A lot of my clients who are animal lovers want to donate to the SPCA, and they want to go to the SPCA thrift stores. But I would say that Choices for Youth for me is a big one that I like to donate to. And then Stella Circle, Gathering Place, like I mentioned. Sometimes I think I've seen Association for New Canadians will call out for certain items, but I guess the thing that sometimes is frustrating for people is that maybe they're not looking for the items you have when you want to get rid of them. So, sometimes if you're really passionate about it going to a local place or a place that aligns with your values, sometimes you end up waiting a bit for them to need those items. Most of the places that are, I guess, also not-for-profits or they're serving clients in a variety of ways, they don't really have a lot of storage space either. So having some understanding for those groups around that. But I would say for a lot of people even, I recently got all my old porcelain dolls that I had as a child that came from my parents' house that, I will never use again. And my child definitely will destroy them. So it's like, where am I donating these? And there is a group around supporting Ukrainian newcomers. And so I posted them in that group. And within, I think, 18 hours, I had gotten rid of 36 dolls or something like that. And they were so excited to get them. And for them, it was something that was beautiful and that, their kids were excited about. But so looking at not necessarily even if you want to go through an organization, but can you target a group through social media, like through a Facebook group where even single parents and things like that, you can always donate through there on social media.
I know that I know some people that work in the film and television industry in this province, and they're often looking for things of a certain vintage.
Yeah.
I had a friend that was working on a project that was set in the early 1980s, and she was on the hunt for ashtrays that were specific to like 1982.
Right.
So, like things like, and I know I've interviewed before the crowd with Retro Tech NL. So, if they have like an old Atari system, for example, Son of a Critch, set in the late 80s and early 1990s, they're often on the hunt for things that may to us look like a bit of junk we just got in the house.
Right. And I think sometimes too, I've donated to at the Arts and Culture Center, the costume bank. And I guess sometimes that's a real hit or miss things in terms of definitely does it align with the thing when they're looking for it and do you have the contact? But if you have things that are vintage or antique, sometimes reaching out to those people in like film or television, there's so many of those projects here now. They could probably advise on whether or not they need things of that era. So that's a really interesting one, the ashtrays.
Yeah.
That's a new one to me.
And it's kind of like you don't think of it until you need it. And I know like the RetroTech people that, if they have things like, like a computer of a certain vintage.
Right.
That most of us wouldn't think about, you either, you're in an office, all of a sudden your computer's replaced with something more contemporary or whatever. Where does that old one go, Yeah,
and there are places, even for people who, you're not necessarily in an office, but a lot of people really feel insecure about decluttering technology in general. So they don't want to get rid of the old laptop, even if they've moved everything off it and they've done that work, which is its own project. They then feel like, well, what if someone gets their hands on this? And so donating it, there are certain companies that do tech drives a couple times a year, or there are safe places to donate so that they will do basically they'll destroy the data and then they'll recycle the tech. So looking at it from that perspective too, so that you can feel secure about your personal information.
Yeah. Got to ask you, you asked me to tell you about this. What is Swedish death cleaning?
This probably aligns more with my approach, I would say, and just my general mindset. But Swedish death cleaning, I really like it because it's pretty blunt and to the point, but essentially the author of that book, and it has since been developed into a TV show too, she's basically saying we're all going to die someday. And, for someone, if they struggle with mortality, maybe it's not the approach for them, but if we're all going down that path, how do you essentially take care of your items now so that people aren't burdened with it when you're gone? And it's a pretty considerate approach, even though, the author is definitely very brisk and abrupt in her messaging, but I really like that. So it's looking at, can you declutter now? And what I like about that is it gives the person a sense of control, because oftentimes it becomes a situation where, an aging parent is sick or they really can't take it on themselves anymore. And then the adult kids are coming in And they often are under time constraints, to be fair, but sometimes it becomes a pretty pushy situation of, oh, come on, Mom, you don't need that anymore. And and so, there's a bit of tacking into, which can lead to regret.
Yes.
And it just doesn't give people the processing time.
Yeah.
So I think if people were doing that gradually over time, then they have a sense of ownership and control, and they don't get into sort of grieving. Like people, I've had clients say to me, I don't even know where all my things went. I don't even know where, what I even have anymore, because they kind of just came in and did a real quick, onslaught of decluttering.
Yeah.
So
that can be harsh as well. Yeah.
Really harsh for people, and they don't get, there is a lot of emotional and psychological work behind all this where people are having to let go and transition and grieve, and whether it's the stuff or what the stuff represents. And so really being gentle to people in that. Like I've had a lot of crying clients, over the years who are apologizing. I'm saying, well, of course you're crying. You're grieving a part of your life or the stuff that represents it. So that's a natural part of it. But sometimes people don't get that if they get that real quick, let's get rid of everything.
Yeah. There's a real psychology behind all of this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, people's stuff represents who they are. So your identity is tied up in your stuff. And so then it can feel really personal to have someone coming in and messing with what represents your identity. And I have a lot of clients, too, who they really rely on their things to bring memories up for them. So some people just don't remember things unless they see the stuff. So then you have that whole piece of it kind of being a memory trigger.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a good place to leave it for our conversation today. Thank you so much for coming in. Now, if anyone listening wants to get a hold of you, how can they access your services?
Right. So they can look me up through social media. So if you Google April Miller Professional Organizing, so I did deal with a hacking issue this summer, so I'm still kind of resolving some of the tech fallout from that. But definitely you can reach out through any, Instagram, Facebook. And then we can chat. I always have a conversation with people first. We never just kind of dive into work. So people need to know if I'm a good fit for them and vice versa.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in. I got lots to take home now and stare at my closets without thinking of arson because
I've had clients who have wanted to go down that road, but yeah, my pleasure for sure.
All right. That is April Miller, professional organizer. And that brings us to the end of the signal for today. I just want to remind you that if you've missed an episode of the show or you want to catch some of what the conversation was, we are a podcast. Just check for CBC, The Signal, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get it on our programs page at CBC Newfoundland and Labrador. We're also on our CBC Newfoundland and Labrador YouTube page. You can see and hear episodes of The Signal there. So just in case you want to get at it. Believe we have a bit of music to go out on right now, don't we? Yeah, this is Outcast. It's a song so fresh, so clean. I'm Heather Barrett. See you tomorrow.
And Monte Carlos and El Dorado. So I'm waking up out of my slumber feeling like Rollo. So follow, it's showtime at the Apollo minus the Kiki Shepherds. With a bada with a leopard print. Teddy, Pendergrass, cooler than Freddie Jackson, sipping a milkshake in a snowstorm. Left I throw warm in the dorm room at the AU. We blew hay to athletes might cake you, but you must have me mistaken with them statements that you make, civilians on display. My bongo hooked it up. Oh my god, dip my rim today so they can ride out to the honeycomb hide out. I'ma show you how to wild out like Jack Tripper. Let me be Bambino on your slippers. YKK on your zipper. Lick you like a lizard when I'm slizzard. A sober. 6 million ways to fold ya. Like Noah's, I get 2 of views and you get pretty deep. But I call your from 80s. I know you'll be there for me, girl.